Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of, and unto this Conan, destined to wear the jeweled crown of Aquilonia upon a troubled brow. It is I, his podcaster, who alone can tell thee of his saga, for it is time for the audio scrolls of Geek History Lesson to tell the tale of his 40th anniversary!
Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I am Jason, the Sumerian Inman.
And I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character or construct or movie from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about it in about an hour. And this week we're taking one of Jason's faves.
That's right. We are talking about the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yes, this movie is 40 years old, so we are going to celebrate it. Actually, it won't be the only movie that we're going to celebrate its 40th anniversary. Next month, we're going to be journeying into the final frontier. So if you enjoy this movie, Retrospective, stick around, you know. But Conan the Barbarian, 1982, directed by John Milius and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, is, I'm just going to throw it out there, one of my favorite films of all time. Yes. I have loved this film for a very long time. And part of the reason why I love this film is because it takes itself seriously, but not to the point of forgetting what kind of movie it is. And weirdly, for a movie called Conan the Barbarian, it's strangely poetic, it's subtly choreographed, and it's strangely beautiful. Every frame is very carefully considered for a barbarian movie in the 80s that really shouldn't be. You wouldn't expect Conan the Barbarian to be this beautiful masterpiece, but I kind of think it is a beautiful masterpiece, and we're going to talk about it. So before we get too far into this, I just want to say that this lesson was suggested by somebody. Well, actually, I think he actually suggested that we cover the actual character Conan the Barbarian, but I'm countering it. Robert Sussman is one of our listeners who suggested we do Conan the Barbarian. So Robert Sussman, thank you for suggesting that. So before we get into the movie, we are going to say the biggest thing that I know all Conan fans are saying out there. Yes, the characters in this movie differ from the books, but I think there is a weird mythological dimension, eerie world full of danger and mysteries that are in the books at tone that I think this movie actually does very well. There's always a delicate balance in sword and sorcery films, and I actually think Conan the Barbarian finds it. I think there's enough barbarism in this, yeah. And I think there's a lot of like magic in this that really works. And we're going to go into it, and you're going to hear Ashley's thought about this too. But let's get to the 10-cent origin of Conan the Barbarian, 1982.
I do just want to add, if people want a little bit more Conan content, if you go check out our 5 comic books that you should read if you loved the Northmen, we lean a lot into some fun recommendations there and Professor Jason's love of Conan the Barbarian. But you're here now listening to this podcast, and the 10-cent origin is the part of the podcast where Professor Jason teaches you all the who's it's and what's it's galore in case you get invited to a Hyperborean, I don't remember what this land is called. Hyperborean cocktail party, and someone doesn't know who Conan is.
The 1982 film Conan the Barbarian was directed by John Milius. It was written by John Milius and Oliver Stone. Yes, that Oliver Stone. It was based on Conan the Barbarian, the series of short stories and novels by Robert E. Howard. It was produced by, most famously, Dino De Laurentiis. It starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, James Earl Jones, Sandahl Bergman, Ben Davidson, Cassandra Gavioli, Jerry Lopez, Mako, Valerie Quinessence, William Smith, and Max von Sydow. Cinematography was by Duke Callahan. It was edited by C. Timothy O'Meara, and music was by Basil Polidoris. It was released by Universal. It was released specifically in May 14th, 1982 in North America. It had a budget of $20 million, and it made somewhere around $80 million. So it was a box office hit. Not a runaway smash, but it was a hit.
Yeah, making $100 million is a very, very worthy for this would be considered now a micro budget film.
Which
we're
weird.
obviously not counting for inflation. That's a really excellent showing. Also, we're doing our best with the non-English names. So please, if we mispronounce someone's names, please be kind about it. But also Dino De Laurentiis, if anyone is a fan of Italian horror or giallo, he was a huge tastemaker in Italian and European cinema as well, before he kind of came over and made a bunch of big American movies. He made a great movie in 1960s called The Witch.
He also made a great movie in the early 90s, Army of Darkness.
Yes.
So let's get to the meet cute. Of course, this is where we tell you where we first encountered this movie. Ashley, I know the first time you encountered this movie was because I showed it to you.
Yep, that's true.
So how about we get to mine?
Yes, tell me where you first meeted and cuted Conan the Barbarian.
So I don't know exactly.
How dare you?
But
this is the internet.
I'm pretty certain that I saw this movie when I was in high school, and it was one of the various VHS tapes. Yes, I said VHS tapes that I got from the local library at Walnut, Kansas, because that was our hub for a lot of cinema and a lot of things that were outside the box. And this was one of those movies. And I think I was inspired by that cover that was very inspired by the Frank Frazetta paintings, which we will get to, which is Arnold Schwarzenegger standing with a knee up and the sword above his head. And of course, Valeria is like wrapped around his leg.
So you just picked it up, you think, because you liked the cover. You hadn't like read any of the stories or the comics.
No.
You didn't really know who Conan was, but you were like, this looks fun.
I have read the books of Conan, but I read them post the movie.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, fun fact, before we get too far into this movie, there will also be spoilers for this movie, even though it's 40 years old, but we just want to put that out there. But before we go to that, I just want to talk about, Ashley, that technically now Conan the Barbarian is a Marvel Comics character.
That is a true and scientific fact, and he deals with magic.
Yes. So over at patreon.com/Jawiin, that's Jawiin, we have launched Marvel Club.
Woo!
There is a special offer that is happening this month, where if you join Marvel Club in the month of May, you get a Doctor Strange art print by Sarah Louver. She has drawn covers for Super Best Friend, my comic, and Teen Titans Go. And not only that, it's the first of 3 interconnected prints that Marvel Club will be sending out this year. Plus, there will be video retrospectives of Doctor Strange 1, a video review of Doctor Strange the Multiverse of Madness, plus video reviews of maybe all the Thor movies and a couple of Spider-Man movies, along with 3 other podcasts we give you every single month. So if any of that sounds cool, go over and support this podcast. Check out all that content over at patreon.com/Jawiin. That's Jawiin.
If I can say one last thing about the fact that Marvel owns Conan now, I find it particularly funny because not too long ago there was a Conan meets Wonder Woman comic book that DC published.
Was there really?
Yeah, there was. It was pretty good.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to do a little bit of explaining of who the Conan the Barbarian is before we get into this movie. So
I think that's a good idea.
The character Conan comes from the world of Hyboria. Now, it is a pulp fiction writer creation by Robert E. Howard. He published these in the 1930s in a magazine called Weird Tales. These barbarian tales were very popular with the readership. It was about a barbarian adventuring through a savage and a mystical world. And basically, it was, a powerful giant who lives by no rules but his own. So, when they originally started making the production of this movie, they took Howard's original stories and they infused them with John Milius's Nietzsche-inspired might makes right philosophy. John Milius was also a big fan of martial arts. So this film is like brutal and weirdly contemplative. I can't even say the word.
Contemplative.
Thank you. That actually kind of, again, takes this subject matter very seriously.
Yeah, for a quote-unquote barbarian, Conan is quite monk-like and reflective.
Now, you might have wondered earlier, I said Oliver Stone had a participation on the script. Oliver Stone wrote the first draft. Oliver Stone also wanted to direct this movie. But his draft is actually set in a post-apocalyptic future and not the past. And John Milius basically abandoned most of that. I'll get into some specifics later on about like what survived from Oliver Stone's script. But the ambitious young Stone approached the film as the first of 12 projected stories. Yeah.
Well, he must have been like 19 if he thought he was getting 12 parts.
He wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to return every 2 years to do another Conan.
For the next 24 years.
Specifically, like James Bond.
For 24 years? That's there must have been a lot of cocaine involved in
this movie's first draft is actually very loosely based on 2 Robert E. Howard Conan stories, A Witch Shall Be Born and Black Colossus. And fun fact, the Herborian age of Conan is approximately actually been dated. Creator Robert E. Howard says it's around 10,000 BC.
Okay.
So, Oliver's, and again, like I said, Oliver Stone's story was, of course, post-apocalyptic. Now, Dino De Laurentiis used his clout to pitch the project successfully to Universal Pictures, but concerns about the violent and very expensive elements of Stone's future script, Dino De Laurentiis is the one who brought on John Milius, and John Milius was brought on because he wrote the ultra-violent Dirty Harry movie starring Clint Eastwood and Magnum Force. And he was hired to direct the film and to rework the screenplay. Now, I will talk about this a little bit more. Arnold Schwarzenegger was attached to this movie before John Milius was. Apparently, Arnold Schwarzenegger was always the choice to play Conan. They never considered any other person.
That's wild because he'd only been in one movie, I believe, before this, which is Tarzan in New York or something like that.
No, and it was Oliver Stone's idea to make it Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, look, I'm going to say this as politely as possible. Dodged a giant freaking bullet by not having that version be made.
Yes.
But I actually think that Arnold is one of the key parts of this movie and one of the reasons why this movie endures. So, I mean, I doff my cap for the excellent casting choice.
Yeah. Now, John Milius, avid surfer.
Yep.
And he's an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah.
And he's a big fan of movies like Seven Samurai. And that's the aesthetic that he wanted to put into Conan. Now, Milius retained many of the scenes from the first half of Oliver Stone's draft, which include the Tree of Woe scene, which we will talk, and the Tower of Set scene, which is where the big snake is. And he discarded the mutant-heavy futuristic second half.
The tower scene, one of my favorite scenes.
Yes. His personal survival of the fittest philosophy is what informed the new screenplay, including the extended prologue depicting Conan's evolution from weenie kid to muscled warrior.
Weenie kid, like a 5-year-old.
Yeah. So let's talk about the actual movie here instead of the pre-production. Now, Milius, as I said, was a big fan of all the Kurosawa stuff, and he was also a big fan of fantasy artist Frank Frazetta's paintings of Conan that were seen on several of the Marvel comic books. He said, and I quote, "Frazetta has certainly been a terrific inspiration to all of us. He's the high priest of Conan, and he has been more important to me and to the look and the spirit of Conan than the original Conan books."
I would agree with that, absolutely.
So, Milius is also responsible for the secret sauce of this movie, which I agree with, is that Milius hired his friend Basil Polidorus to score the film, to compose the film. Now, I said this to Ashley when we watched the movie. I can actually hum almost the entirety of this soundtrack.
Yeah, Jason hummed almost the entire first scene because I said, prove it.
Yep.
And I will say that there's been many times when you've been on script or you've been working on like Super Best Friend or when you were doing Super Soldiers, where I would come in and you'd be listening to the score.
So the composer wrote 2 hours of music for Conan. And once filming was completed, Milius gave Polidorus 2 tapes of the finished film, one without music and the other with personal excerpts, from the work of Wagner, Stravinsky. Wagner, excuse me. And Stravinsky. Man, I'm just showing my unintelligence right now, aren't I?
I only, look, I'm not an opera fan. I only know that because it's Kurt's last name. It's Nightcrawler's last name.
This movie is what made Basil Polidorus famous.
The legend that he is.
Yes. And this, of course, is the great template for an epic fantasy score. And I don't know if I've ever said this before, but I consider this to be actually the greatest film score ever composed.
I don't know if I've ever heard
Take that, Star Wars.
Yeah, someone's tweeting at you right now.
Yeah, I don't care. I actually think
Star Wars also have very, very similar poster layouts.
This is one of the few film scores that I feel that you can hear the entire story just in the music. And it's almost, I don't think there's a single track that's skippable. Like, I think you put it on and you listen to it like the movie.
Yeah.
All right, so let's actually talk about the movie here, Ashley. It starts with the Riddle of Steel. That Conan's father tells Conan about the Riddle of Steel. And I have a quote here. He says, "The secret of steel has always carried with it a mystery. You must learn its riddle, Conan. You must learn its discipline. For no one in this world you can trust, not men, not women, not beasts." And he points to the sword. "This you can trust." And it's very interesting to almost start a warrior barbarian movie with almost a piece of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel about this? Now, of course, the real opening is that, you see the sword being built. It's like, don, 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 the opening theme of Conan.
I like the forging of the sword, actually. It reminds me of in Return of the King when they reforged Narsil into Anduril and then Elrond brings it to Aragorn.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, what do you think about that this whole movie is anchored by this Riddle of Steel?
I mean, this is samurai AF.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a little Japanese boy who is told either like this is the question that you're seeking the answer to, or like this is the noble principle, the honor, right, by which you should live your life, and then of course is brutally murdered, and the kid spends the rest of their life on a revenge quest. I think it's a very interesting choice, and I think it's one of the reasons that sets this film apart from simply being like this. I always consider this to be a B movie. But this could have been a B movie in the true tradition of like, this could have just been a bunch of lugheads beating each other up for an hour and we call it a movie.
I will throw this out there. I don't know if you're familiar with this movie, but the B movie version of this movie is Beastmaster. That is also an 80s movie.
Yes.
And if you've seen Beastmaster, you know exactly what I mean.
Yes. I've never seen it, but I know what it is.
I like Beastmaster, but it's the B movie version of this movie.
Yes. Absolutely. But I think that it's details like this, and it's the score, and it is opening on the forging of a sword that brings this. It brings this a little closer.
I'm not playing the music, everybody, because it's
copyrights.
Copyrights. I'm sorry.
It brings this a little closer to something like Arthurian legend, or even something like The Lord of the Rings than it does to simply we shot this for $5 in our backyard.
Yeah. And then the movie continues, and I think this is the part where I remember when I first saw this movie. This is the part that really captured me and really showed to me the power of film, because we go to the village after the Riddle of Steel, and Conan just wandered around the forest. People in the village are just doing their things, and Conan's in the forest, and he's like, hee, look, trees. Oh, look, there's a thing over here. And then
that actor's 53 now.
I know.
He's a grown up.
We're talking about the 40th anniversary here. And he hears just the footsteps. Now, in the movie, there are no sound effects. No. The only sound you're hearing, there's no dialogue. The only sound you're hearing is Basil Poledouris' score.
Yeah, no one speaks for about 11 minutes.
That like, and then here come the horse, like it carries and the horses come. And I remember, again, I could so vividly remember this moment of thinking like, wow, I've never seen a movie like do this. I've never seen a movie just like let images and music carry it.
Okay, so
true power of film.
I have a note about this in my notes as well.
Please.
Because throughout this movie, I noticed this as an actor, there is a shocking lack of dialogue.
Yes.
Now, I think part of that, and this is going to sound like
beautiful.
This is going to sound like a read, and it's going to sound like I'm dragging Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I don't mean it like that. Part of it, I think, is because this is one of his first big outings in his second language, a language he was less fluent with in the 80s than he is now. So I think part of that was a really intelligent, you're going to drag me, I could see it.
No.
I think is a really intelligent choice to play to his strengths and his abilities at the time when this film was made. But also when you have Mako narrating this, you can lean a lot on the strength of that. And I'm going to just keep comparing it to Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings also opens with the narration from Galadriel.
Well, I'll say this. I was going to save this till the end, but you don't get to Lord of the Rings without Conan the Barbarian.
No, absolutely not.
And fun fact, you talked about the opening narration.
Yeah.
Originally, it was supposed to be Arnold, and then they decided to go with Mako. So they actually recorded Arnold saying the opening. And
I think Arnold does a good job in this movie. I think he's absolutely comprehensible, but there is not a lot of dialogue in this movie.
No, and the studio executives actually are the ones that nixed that. But we are going to talk about Arnold's voice things.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about, yes. But to me, that's the difference. Television is dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Stage is dialogue. Film
stage has to be dialogue.
Is images and I think score.
Well, can we talk about this amazing character? And you said this when we watched this movie in preparation for the podcast. You were like, you said Conan's mom is so great. Conan's mom doesn't say a single word in this movie. And she is so incredible.
Well, because there's the incredible moment where Thulsa Doom is standing in front of her. Her husband, what I want to also point out, and I love in this movie the choice that Conan's dad is actually killed by 2 warrior dogs of Thulsa Doom. He's not given a warrior's death.
Yeah.
He's giving
it's not a good death.
It's not a good death. It's kind of an unclean death. And I think that is a specific choice. And then his mother is the one that is sort of given the warrior's death.
Yeah.
And his mother is standing, the beautiful shot. Now, Ashley, I want to ask you, they have never confirmed this.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that confirms it either way. But there is this almost 2-minute interplay. No dialogue.
Yeah.
Where it's James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom looking at Conan's mother. And Conan's mother has the sword up and she is ready to hit him. And she's protecting young Conan. And Thulsa Doom sort of looks at her. And then she lowers the sword.
Yeah, he's magic.
And then he cuts. Why do you think she lowers the sword?
Because he's magic.
Okay, good.
Because he's talking to her.
For mine,
yeah, absolutely. That's a threat. You can see it in his eyes.
I have, for years and years and years, have said to myself, he hypnotized her.
100%. Yeah. Like I don't know if I believe that Thulsa Doom is 1,000 years old. I will say,
yes,
which is said multiple times. It's sort of the rumor.
He's supposed to be. He's said to be a dark wizard.
But I believe that he has mystical powers. And I will say, if Thulsa Doom were played by a character actor or like a stage actor less good than James Earl Jones, again, this would be silly. This moment would be awkward. But he's very good at having things going on behind the eyes. So you absolutely, like for me, there was no doubt that it was magic and that he compelled her to do that.
1982.
Yeah.
The film was in 81. James Earl Jones was not the first choice. Who do you think was? Also a character actor from a genre series.
Oh, God, I don't know.
Sean Connery.
Oh, Sean Connery. I was like, Mel Gibson.
Yeah, Sean Connery was the original choice for Thulsa Doom. And then they went to James Earl Jones.
Because of James Bond?
Yeah, because of James Bond.
Weird.
Yeah.
Weird pull. I think they made
the better
right choice.
Yep.
I mean, no offense to Sean Connery, but they certainly got the better actor.
He turned it down.
Of the two. Yeah. That's so funny. He's like, I will not play a wizard. Because he also turned down Gandalf. Because
James Earl Jones apparently had a choice between this movie and another movie. And then he read the script of this and said yes.
Well, Conan is Shakespearean, and he's a Shakespeare. He's a classic trained actor.
Specifically, let's get into some production stuff here.
Yeah.
The beheading of Conan's mother by Thulsa Doom. John Milius originally edited the scene down, fearing that the full version would give them an X rating. In the original version, when her head hits the ground, we see it hit the ground, and it spouts blood, and they moved its eyes and mouth erratically with the manipulation of puppet cables hidden in the snow.
There is a lot of blood in this for the time. By contemporary standards, there's not. But when you look back at like television shows or other movies from the era, there is a lot of blood. I
will also say to any of our listeners, if you've never seen the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie and you decide because of our podcast to go watch the movie, I highly recommend it. Do not let the filmmaking of 1982 bump you from this movie, because there is the worst sound effect in the world happens in this opening scene. It's the first time you see a guy on horseback when he comes in and he like cleaves somebody in the chest. And it's followed by 2 sound effects. The sound effect of him cleaving is like a whoosh.
Yeah, they thought that swords were like whips.
It's a very big whoosh. It's almost like the famous Wusho 4 from our Just League podcast over at patreon.com/Jawiin. And then the guy goes, ah!
Yeah.
So it's like really bad, but don't let that detract you.
It's like reading a classical book. Your brain will adjust and you'll enjoy it.
Yeah. I also think it's very unfair to judge any old movie based on modern standards.
Based on yes, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about Thulsa Doom. Thulsa Doom is not a Conan book character. Thulsa Doom is an amalgamation of 2 of Robert E. Howard's creations. He takes the name from the villain in Howard's Call of Atlantis series of stories, but he actually acts like the real Conan antagonist, the Conan's Joker, if you will, Thoth Amon, who is a Stygian sorcerer from the story The Phoenix on the Sword. If you ask most people who is Conan's big supervillain, they're all going to say Thoth Amon.
Cool.
So they just kind of took the name from one character, put it on top of another character, but Folsom Doom you will really not find in the books if you read the books.
That's okay. That happens in adaptation, and I think it actually works. Like, Folsom Doom is an excellent movie villain.
Folsom Doom's two lieutenants were played by professional athletes. Sven Ole Thorensen was a bodybuilder, and I have seen some people say that it was Arnold Schwarzenegger who got him the role, and Bed Davidson was an American football player. Okay.
That's why they don't speak in this movie.
Yeah. We get to the Wheel of Pain.
Yeah.
Every sequence in this movie also has a sort of overarching title. Basil Poledouris uses that in the music and the soundtrack, but also like you can kind of like, this is the Wheel of Pain because Conan is taken from his village and he is forced to push. It's never quite certain what he is grinding, what mill. It's obviously a mill of some type.
It's either a mill or it's lifting or lowering a gate. I think it's a mill.
I have always assumed, because swords are such a big part of the story, that this is some sort of a mining mill or something. This is something where it's like smashing rocks to make swords or the steel or something.
Lord of the Rings also directly lifts this when we see Mordor for the first time. To open the Black Gate, there are trolls pushing a Wheel of Pain to open and close it.
But I think, again, this is another one of those moments where the first time I saw this movie, the fact that we take young Conan and we put him on this wheel, and there's like 50 kids pushing this wheel, and he's tied to this wheel. He has to push this wheel for years.
Yeah, they go through this whole village and they only take the children, which is not a smart thing to do as a conquering nation, but I understand why. It shows how evil these people are.
Well, they're the easiest ones that you could corrupt and make your servants.
Yeah, but they're going to die.
Maybe. And the strongest will survive. Again, a lot of this movie is the survival of the fittest.
Yeah, but in this sequence, we see there's like 5
actually, at the end of the sequence, Conan is the only one that survives. Talk
about his, you mentioned this when we watched it, talk about his posture changing over the sequence.
Well, okay. One, again, talk about Battlestar Galactica taking influence from this when they do their time jump. When we do the time jump, it's that Conan, like when he becomes a teenager, puts his head down. And the first time you see Arnold in this movie, Conan puts his head up, and you see it's the art, and then like the I'm humming it for you. Go listen, it's an amazing soundtrack. It's on Spotify. And the soundtrack, it goes up, and as you notice, they don't cut away with the reveal. There's a couple more turns around the circle, and when they keep turning, Conan stands more upright and more upright and more upright. So by the end, it's not. Pushing this thing is easy for him, and he's the only one pushing it. So that tells you, it gives you the idea of how strong he is. Ashley, what did you think about the first time you saw this? Of that, this is the they kind of fast forwarded to get to Arnold.
I was glad we didn't have to deal with child actors for that much longer, because child actors are a real mixed bag.
This child actor never talks in the movie.
No, which is no shade to him. I'm sure he grew up to be a great actor, but
he's the one that's 53.
He's 53. It was a smart choice to not have him say any words. He's a cute little kid, though. I think it was a really smart way to show suffering over the long term. Because also Conan's not interesting as a child. Hot take. Conan's interesting as a big, strong man. Big, strong 33-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold was 33 when he filmed this movie. Yeah.
Playing a 18-year-old or whatever. No, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful sequence.
Fun fact, everybody. Arnold's first line of dialogue in this movie is, "Ah!" And it's not until 19 minutes and 14 seconds.
Yeah, his first spoken line of dialogue is at 24 or 33.
Yes. So, again, we talked about that Schwarzenegger was cast before Milius was hired. Fun fact, he actually slimmed down from his pure, biggest bodybuilder physique for the role of Conan. Mainly, he decided that when he got Conan, he actually took up swimming and running over lifting.
Aerobics, so that he would be able to run.
Yes. By the time he delivered the speeches on camera, Arnold, again, English is not his first language, and he had a lot of difficulty because this is his first English, or one of the first English-spoken films he'd done.
It's probably the most English he had ever spoken up to this point in such a compressed amount of time.
He rehearsed each speech 40 or 50 times with the help of John Milius, the director.
That's how you do it.
And Schwarzenegger also received some help from stage actor James Earl Jones, who helped him, who would actually demonstrate line readings for him and line reading options. He's like, you could say it this way, you could say it this way, in return for Arnold giving him workout tips as they made the movie.
So I want to say two things about this. One, this is incredibly generous because it's not just enough to be able to learn the phonetics of speaking a language. There's also and I'm learning this as I am studying German, it's to put the stress where a native speaker would put the stress versus where you would put your stress based on what your first language is. So like that's really important. And his diction is clearer here than in some later movies.
I think it's pretty good.
I think it's pretty good too.
Yeah.
Again, they don't give him a lot to say, which I think was smart, but also what a generous thing. Like I love stories about casts who like each other or this is care. And this is like a dedication to your craft. And James Earl Jones didn't have to do this. That's a gig that he would have been like, that's a speech coach's job. He clearly did that because he cared. And because he cared about his craft and because he cared about this young actor that he was working with. So I think that's such a wonderful thing to do. And him to be like, I don't know, you want to show me how to do a push-up?
Yeah. So now we're going to get to my favorite scene in the entire film, the Atlantean Sword scene, the running of the dogs. And we're going to talk about the dogs of the wolves chasing Conan in a second. But Conan is basically let go of his, he's been trained in the gladiatorial fights. So that's where he gets his fighting ability.
Yep.
And then his master just lets him go.
Yep.
And they never explain why. His master, gets a heart and finally lets him go. And so Conan is running by himself. He falls into a cavern and he finds that it's a throne room from an old kingdom. And I bring that up because I'm going to talk about that there is a big theme of Conan arriving in kingdoms and suddenly being the best person in the kingdom.
Or fallen kingdoms.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is a forgotten kingdom. It's that there's a king on a throne. He's dead and he is holding a sword. And that is the famous Conan sword, the Atlantean sword, which apparently cost $10,000 to make. And also Rob Liefeld apparently owns the real one right now.
The screen use.
Yes. So I love this because one, the piece of music is my favorite piece of music in the entire film, but it's all silent, except for Conan says Crom once.
Yeah.
And he goes up to the sword and he takes the sword. There's this beautiful moment where the skeleton nods and the crown falls off him. The idea that Conan is the new king. I love that it's this idea that we are all dust basically until the next conqueror comes around. It's
also again very Arthurian that he is like destined to be a king and a conqueror.
But this is my favorite sword in all of film history. This is the Atlantean sword. I think it's amazing. I just love the nobility of it, the simplicity of storytelling with this idea of like the entire story is told in this scene that Conan is the new king and he grabs the sword, by destiny or right or however you want to say it.
I was going to say something, but I think I'm going to hold it till the end. This is another thing that I didn't realize that they lived directly in the Northman.
Oh, that's right. So we're talking about the dogs, Ashley. Back to the production interesting notes. This was the first scene to be filmed. January 7th, 1981 was Conan running from the pack of wolves. And it actually included the first of many of the tumultuous shoots, many accidents.
What happened?
So one of the dogs standing in for wolves was trained to attack an animal skin that Schwarzenegger was wearing.
Yeah, with a pad under it, probably.
The dog got a little over-enthusiastic about the role and pushed the actor off a 10-foot cliff into a briar patch.
Oh my God, Jesus Christ.
So we won't talk about every accident, but there are a lot of accidents in this movie. In fact, John Milius once said that he was like, we didn't have a good shooting day unless Arnold was bleeding.
Yeah, this is the reason why there are things like stunt coordinators now and safety officers on set.
Well, fun fact, the three main warriors, Subutai, Valeria, and Conan, all perform their own stunts.
Yes, which you can see in that 80s style, both to their credit and sometimes to the detriment of the film.
We got to wink a little bit to Subutai, his friend. Named for, of course, a Mongol warrior. But Jerry Lopez was a surfing buddy of John Milius.
He's great.
He's still alive, by the way, and he still has a website where he sells surfboards.
Custom surfboards.
JerryLopez.com. Go check it out.
And check out how expensive a good surfboard is, because we don't surf, and this was shocking to me.
It was shocking, but apparently he is a legendary surfer, which I think is quite amazing. But let's talk about, Ashley.
We talk about how Conan hates snakes?
Well, we're not to the snakes yet.
I know. He just hates animals. He hates dogs. He hates snakes.
We can talk about, again, the civilization motif where they're like Subutai and him are running. They talk about their gods. Is very into Subutai believes in the four winds. And he's like, Kram. And he's like, oh, my God lives above your God.
Your God lives under my God.
And then they go to civilization. And they think it stinks.
Yeah. Well, he does tell the witch, who we've skipped over, that he hates snakes because he's looking for the snakes. It's a real Indiana Jones kind of vibe.
I skipped past the witch because the witch scene is actually my least favorite scene in this movie. But also, it is one of two, I'll just put it out there, problematic implied rape scenes.
I don't know if implied. I think implied is generous.
Well,
but
yes. The witch is consensual.
Okay, so there is both rape and consensual sex in this.
Yes.
They are the awkwardest, longest sex scenes.
Yes, they are.
Because all on-screen sex is awkward.
But it would be weird for a barbarian movie to not have sex in it. It would be weird.
I guess, but
it wouldn't feel like a barbarian movie.
I guess
that's the genre.
I don't know if we needed a full minute of it.
Oh, that's fair.
Is all I'm saying.
Because there is one more sex scene in this movie. It's a him and Valeria.
There is, and it's very long.
Yeah, it is a little bit too long.
A whole sequence.
But it is a thing. Like you talked about, there are so many. This is a rated R movie.
Absolutely.
There are so many bare breasts in this movie. But when you think barbarian, that's the genre. Like, it's the one thing that I think you sort of have to but I'll say this, at least this movie gives us a strong, capable, badass woman who can also outfight Conan in Valeria.
Well, the witch is that too, nominal. I don't think the performance necessarily lives up to how, the witch could have been a cooler moment than it is in execution.
That is fair.
That's just my taste. That's not a drag on the actor, not a drag on anyone who works on the film. But the idea of the witch is pretty cool. And then it's kind of echoed later because she evolves into a ball of fire and flies away. It's kind of echoed later when
he throws her into the fire.
Yeah, when the ghosts kind of come back for Conan. But anyway, we can move on from the witch.
Yes. So Valeria, as played by Sandal Bergman, her name, by the way, is only spoken in the movie after her death.
Yeah.
Fun fact.
I didn't know she had a name until I looked at IMDb.
Yep. The female lead, Valeria, actually has her roots in two female characters from Robert E. Howard's stories. Her namesake was Conan's companion in Red Nails, and her personality and her fate of that of Belit, the pirate queen from Queen of the Black Coast.
Queen of the Black Coast, by the way, is considered to be one of the greatest Conan stories.
So Milius wanted to cast a dancer as Valeria and ended up choosing Sandal Bergman on the recommendation of Bob Fosse himself.
Oh, wow.
Who had directed Sandal Bergman when she starred in All That Jazz.
The only man in the world who's allowed to tell a woman how to use her body.
That's right.
Bob Fosse.
Bergman enjoyed the role, actually saying that all this hacking and stabbing is great fun. It's also given the cast a chance to learn a marvelous variety of martial arts. But Bergman said that she took the part again, just like James Earl Jones, because she liked the script. Bergman also injured during filming. I said that so redneck. Injured during filming.
We've been watching a lot of Yellowstone lately.
While rehearsing a fight, she parried a blow from the opponent's sword, only to have her forefinger sliced open to the bone because her weapon was missing its handle guard. The wound required 6 stitches.
Yep.
Stunt coordinator Terry Lemmerd confirms that everybody did their own stunts. And again, like I said, Milius would often improve the morale by saying that physical pain was temporary, but this film will live forever.
You mentioned earlier that he was in a Nietzsche follower. To me, that can be a red flag in a male's personality, but that's a very Nietzschean sort of perspective.
I forget his name. I'm sorry, but also just fun fact, the sword master, talking about the martial arts, the sword master of this film is the Asian sword master who teaches Conan in this movie. It's the same guy.
Oh, that's very, very cool.
The guy who slaps Conan when he can't hold his sword right.
Yes, great sequence. That training sequence is very cool, by the way. One of my favorite things about Valeria is this film, other than the style upon which it is shot, because that's always going to be a marker of the time, does a pretty good job at hiding the fact that it's an 80s movie, but where they fail every single time. Valeria has 80s AF hair.
Hey,
she looks great, by the way, but it's the wafty Farrah Fawcett bangs.
It's just like Star Wars. Luke Skywalker and Han Solo's
Surfer boy hair
are so 70s. They date the movie. But actually, I want to talk to you because I like Valeria. I like her a lot. And I think that she is equal of Conan. She is smart of Conan. I think
She might be smarter than Conan, honestly.
She's definitely smarter than Conan. But Conan's smart. You can tell even from this movie that Conan's smart.
He's not a dummy. He's silent, but he's not a dummy. Yeah, for sure.
Which is also it's a big criticism that a lot of book fans give this movie, because Conan in the books talks a lot more, and Conan is actually, I would say, smarter than movie Conan.
Probably more like a classic strategist.
But that's why Conan always wins in the books, because he's smart. But I think when you look at this movie, we're getting off trail here, but it's fine. When you look at this movie, especially how he wins against Folsom Doom by setting all the traps, I think that shows his intelligence.
Yeah, because Conan's a riff on Sherlock. Like, even down to the way they were first published, Conan is a riff on Sherlock.
But what do you think about Valeria? Because I do think that Valeria is Conan's soulmate.
I don't know if I know enough about the Conan mythology to speak on that.
I'm just saying, for the movie, for the basis of the movie, you don't need to know anything else.
Absolutely. Like, I buy their relationship and I buy them as equals. I think, as with most characters in this movie, there's a couple line readings where I'm like, you could have done another one. But overall, I find Miss Bergdahl to be very capable, and she's good in the role. And I think it's because she's a dancer, because she's in her body. That even though the fight choreography is maybe not up to the standards of like a contemporary fight choreography, she seems like she is in control. And I'll say this, she wields a sword better than Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I also think she has an amazing introduction, because I love that they find her because she's also trying to rob the tower.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, we might as well work together.
I love the tower snakes. Is that what it's called?
The Tower of Set.
Of Set.
Yeah. Or the Snake Tower sequence.
The Snake Tower. So it's, I said this to you when we were watching it. There's something about cult or like dark religious sequences from movies from the 60s to the 80s. That's like all vibes, no point.
Yeah.
Like, just, we're doing the sequence. What does it mean? I don't know. It's beautiful and it's dark and it's kind of scary. Like, I love them scaling the tower, climbing the ropes, seeing all the people in the robes, her knocking the priestess out and infiltrating it, and then Conan like Abu stealing the ruby. Like, that whole sequence is so top notch.
And like fighting the fact that the monster is a giant snake, and the actual, I think the sequence where they chop off the puppet's head and you can tell it's a puppet is like, because it like it splurts the blood, is pretty great. And here we talked about this.
And they built multiple giant snake puppets, because there's a giant snake in the final battle as well, and it looks great.
But the fact of it that there's a beautiful simplicity to this movie, that the monster is just a giant snake. The tower is just this one circular set, and
very classic mythology. There's something like a basilisk.
Well, think about if they would have done that now.
Yeah,
they would see that. You would see. We
saw one in Shang-Chi.
It was like 100.
Or not Shang-Chi. We saw one in Snake Eyes.
It would be like 100-yard CGI room, and you'd be like, that. There's no way in practicality that room can exist.
Yeah.
Fun fact, this is how they built a lot of the sets and a lot of the city sets for this. They were built by there was a number of miniatures. It was always miniatures built by Spanish model maker Emilio Ruiz. He built the Tower of Set, the city of Shadizar, and the castle of King Osric. Now, John Milius did not want to use matte paintings because he deemed them unrealistic. But with Ruiz's help, what they did is they would disguise several of their shooting sets where the actors films, and then they would extend that set with miniatures. So if you look on several of the Tower of Set, and when they're walking around the city and stuff like that, you can't tell. But like the corner, or if you see like a giant extending wall behind Conan or whatever, that's a miniature.
That's just an optical illusion. If you just put the camera at the right angle, it's what they wound up doing in Lord of the Rings.
It looks like it's actually there in front of them. Like you cannot tell it's a miniature.
Very cool.
Yeah. So after the Snake Tower, they go meet King Max von Sydow, or King Osric. Fun fact, later on, Arnold Schwarzenegger once called Max von Sydow the finest, incredible dramatic actor that he had ever worked with. He described Sydow's performance in this movie as staggering. And I agree with him.
I would agree with that for pretty much everything he does.
Ashley, what do you think about this twist that these three thieves went into that tower, stole some jewels, the legend sort of spread, and then they get captured by this king, and obviously they think the king is going to kill them, and then he's like, no, I want to hire you. My daughter is kidnapped. Go get her.
Yeah, that's like a classic trope. I like it. I really like it. Also because Osric is really fun to watch. Like, he is like, I am Claudius, and I am here to chew the scenery. I know what movie I'm in. Please go save my daughter in her shiny nightgown.
I think that King Osric gets the best line in the entire movie.
What do you think that is?
It is, there comes a time, thief, when the jewels cease to sparkle, when the gold loses its luster, when the throne room becomes a prison, and all that is left is a father's love for his child.
It's also funny to be like, so Max von Sydow's been ancient for like 50 years.
Forever. He even looks old in the Seventh Seal. Or Sixth Seal? Seventh Seal. Seventh Seal.
Yeah. So you're like, so you've just looked like that since you were like, what, 19 or so?
Yeah. There are some people that are like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we get to this point, and this might be the point where we can maybe dip into some slight Northman spoilers. That new movie that came out by Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers. Valeria says, screw it, let's leave this guy behind. And Subutai says the same thing. But Conan chooses revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so he decides to go after Folsom Doom and get this daughter by himself. This is my second favorite scene in the movie. I think the music is fantastic. Again, Basil Poledouris is just lifting us to new heights, I think, with this music. He leaves her behind for revenge. He completely abandons his two best friends. And he goes up, and there's a scene, I won't say what scene, but there is a scene in The Northman that is very similar to this, almost exact to the same point where the titled Northman abandons a blonde-haired woman.
Yes, he does.
In a very dramatic fashion, kind of like Conan does.
Yeah. There's also a sequence where he fights a skeleton king for a sword.
That's correct.
And I was like, holy smokes.
Yep. So, like, what do you think about this idea that Conan is obsessed with revenge?
So this is something that only works in fiction.
Yes.
This is like it's a really fun thing because this is all archetype and this is all trope.
Mm-hmm.
This is a classic revenge quest. In the same way that The Northman is a classic revenge quest. There's not a lot of depth to it. And the one thing that drives him is revenge. And it feels, in the sense of fiction, in the sense that this is a film we are watching, really poetic, that he sticks to his principle and that he's going to accomplish this. But if this were a person in real life, I'd be like, you are wrong. Okay. Take the nice lady who loves you, go settle down and go to some...
Look at all these jewels you got.
Therapy.
All these rubies, I think.
Yeah. The really plastic looking jewels that you've taken.
Yes.
This is something that only works in fiction.
Yeah.
But it's very cool in this sequence. And it's interesting to see that they're implying that all of these big moments in Conan's life happen on his own and that Conan is always abandoned. And then the Northman lives in that world. But Conan actually flips it, and Conan achieves victory when he is reunited with his compatriots again.
That's correct.
So I think that's it. I think it's interesting that the messaging is like, you can't actually do it alone.
And he tracks down Folsom Doom. He goes to the cult. He has this
I love the cult.
There's a very funny moment where he meets this priest guy
who definitely wants to have relations with him.
Oh, he definitely wants to have sex with Conan.
Yeah, it's definitely like gay.
I almost said Conan O'Brien. He probably wants to have sex with Conan O'Brien.
Probably,
as well. But there's a point where it might be Schwarzenegger's finest piece of acting in the movie, where he's like, "Can we talk over there? I'm scared." And the priest says, "Oh, you're so well grown."
It's look, the guy who plays the priest is like really like he knows when
he touches his chest too.
He understood the assignment and he goes for it. My favorite part of that bit actually is when Conan knocks him out with a singular punch to the face, just like buries that guy's nose and absolutely murders him, and then.
Conan also punches a camel in this movie and takes him down in one shot.
Yeah. And then he reminds me of when Spock takes down the horse. Then
and when Mongo and Blazing Saddles.
Yes. And so here's the thing. The priest is a thin little beanpole of a man.
Yes, very much so.
And then Conan strips him of his clothes. And when it cuts back to him, he's in garments which were clearly just made for Arnold Schwarzenegger's giant physique. Because if he actually put on that priest's clothes, he would only have the cap and the sash. Like he would be naked. Like there's no way he could put on that robe. And it just and there's no point in having a sequence where he can't put, but like it just made me laugh so hard that he was supposed to put on this man's clothes who clearly might weigh 150 pounds soaking wet. That's again one of those movie magic things you sort of have to let go. Yeah, you're like, this is the I can't remember what it is, Hyperion age, hyperbole age. I don't know what it's called. I'm sorry. It's that kind of magic. Now you've got me like I'm like, which one is it? He comes from the world of Hyboria. So it's the Hyborian age. I think so, or the Hyrule age. Now Hyrule. That's Zelda. Actually, now you're making me consider it. I just think hyperbole is funnier. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
Hyrule? Now you got a vamp. Google is not helpful.
Well, whatever. You said it at the top is fine.
Yeah, whatever. Who cares?
Anyway, he punches out the priest, and then he spends a lot of time hiding in the cult, getting knocked out by the cult.
Well, but the cult figures him out because he stole
Because he's 6.5 feet tall?
No, because he stole
Yes.
the medallion from the Tower of Set.
Yes, he did.
And the guard,
rips it off him.
One of the most subtle pieces, again, this movie is so subtle and masterful. So he keeps showing it to guards. Guards keep waving him through. He gets to the last one. He shows it to the guard, and the guard is like, give me that.
Yep.
And then they cut. And if you notice, Conan keeps going up the stairs.
And the guard is kind of
You see the guard in the foreground walk away with it, and you're like, oh, that's how he's caught.
Yep.
Because the guard knows exactly where that came from. So we get to James Earl Jones's big villain monologue speech.
So good. So evil.
Now, I want to talk to you about one of the best things you can do in writing, of course, is how to create the opposite with your villain, your hero.
Mm-hmm.
And in this, again, Folsom Doom, James Earl Jones says, he's like, I don't remember killing your dad.
Must have been when I was younger.
Must have been when I was younger, when I was obsessed with steel.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he talks about the riddle of steel again. What is the riddle of steel? This question that Conan must answer when he dies, or else he will fail and go to hell or whatever. They put a lot of Viking mythology in this as well. And Folsom Doom says that the riddle of steel is basically absurd. It's flesh that is powerful.
Yeah, that's a great speech, and a great idea.
And he does it with this great moment where he just tells one of his cult members to come to him from high above, and she just commits suicide immediately because she jumps off and dies.
Yeah.
What do you think about this Folsom Doom moment? What do you think about Folsom Doom's answer to the riddle of steel?
So it's funny to me because this is like the sword and sorcery version of like an evil Wall Street guy, evil Wall Street bro, because he's learned that you don't need steel to earn respect. Like he is, in the Machiavellian sense, like choosing to be feared.
Yes.
Like Conan chooses violence every single time. Every possible chance to his detriment, to the detriment of Valeria, to the detriment of Subutai, to the detriment of like everybody else around him. It is Subutai, right? I didn't get the name right. Subutai. Okay. Yep. There's a word in Latin that's subito, which means suddenly, so it's throwing me off.
It's an actual name.
Yes, I know that. I just couldn't remember if I had it right or not.
Hey, I mean, we can't remember Hyrule either. So it's whatever. Hyborian or whatever the hell. I got to figure this out.
So, Conan always chooses violence, but he chooses violence in the physical sense, where he is pitting himself and his physical body,
Hyborian age,
and his steel against others. And James Earl Jones. Folsom Doom chooses violence, but he chooses it through subtlety. He's actually working smarter, not harder. And the idea that having
he just likes snakes,
having power over someone's flesh, which ultimately contains their essence and their being and their life force, that like why would he do anything else? I think it's the most evil you could get under these circumstances.
All right, interesting. Then we get to the Tree of Woe, as we said, that came from Oliver Stone's, where basically Conan is crucified and left in the desert. A vulture shows up. It's a practical effect vulture.
It's a great puppet, actually.
Fun fact: how do you think they stuck Arnold Schwarzenegger up in that on that crucifix?
I think they put some actual nails through his hands, and they said, "Rub some dirt in it, kid."
Well, actually, so the nails, of course, were actually fake, but he's actually they put a bicycle seat onto the tree, and they put it in the tree, and then they use this costume to hide the bicycle seat.
Yeah, the little loincloth.
Yeah. Which is very practical. But I love that.
That still would have been very uncomfortable.
Oh, it was very uncomfortable. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but they filmed the entire movie in Spain.
Yeah.
The entire movie is in Spain.
It looks like California a lot of times, actually. But we know it was filmed in Spain.
But Subutai shows up. He rescues him. We go back to the wizard Mako, and Valeria is there, and his friends have rescued. They have to give a ceremony to the ghostly spirits, because again, Mako lives on a fallen kingdom. He says several times that there was a great battle and a great castle here, and it fell many, many years ago. It's the idea of like it's sort of haunted because it's haunted by the people that are killed there. So they sort of resurrect Conan basically through this speech, and this is again one of the parts that ages the movie quite a bit, because it's the hand-drawn ghosts over Valeria.
As she's trying to protect Conan's body.
Yeah, because the idea is very much, and this is seen this in many myths and many legends, that if Conan is grabbed by the spirits, he is lost forever.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to protect him. But after this, we get the very iconic scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger is on the beach. He is flipping the sword around. He is doing all kinds of things. And that leads us to...
Action Figure Spotlight.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Super 7 company, super7.com, not sponsored of this podcast, made an amazing Conan the Barbarian deluxe ultimate action figure that is Conan from this scene. And I have imposed exactly the same way. This is an action figure, everybody. You can find, I did it on my Instagram as well, instagram.com/Jawiin many years ago. This is an action figure that I've been waiting seriously like 20 years for.
Yeah.
I've been waiting a long time for this action figure. They also have action figures. They have Folsom Doom as the snake. They have all kinds of things. But I've been waiting for years, Ashley, for an action figure of Conan to be able to do that pose. And I have him in that pose.
I know. I heard about it from the very second you pre-ordered it.
I pre-ordered it 2 years ago.
It came last year.
And it came last year. Yeah. So there you go. So it's out there. Go check it out, everybody. All right. Let's talk about some orgy.
Let's not.
Let's talk about an orgy,
Let's
actually.
not.
So they, of course, Conan and Subutai and Valeria, they get painted up with some cool stripes. They go into this orgy and they fight.
Yep.
But Folsom Doom turns into a giant snake.
Yeah, the practical effects on this are amazing.
Yes, they made basically a rubber model of James Earl Jones's face, and they like pushed against it so he became bigger, and then it became like this fake snake like puppet that they made.
It's a great puppet.
It actually looks pretty damn good.
Do you think this is where Aladdin got the idea of turning Jafar into the snake at the end?
The more and more I think about this film, and the more and more watching this film, I think many films stole from this movie more than I realized.
Yeah.
But this orgy scene is really cool because it is because it is
Someone
Conan.
clip that out.
This orgy is pretty cool. Conan kicks over the bucket of human entrails that they're supping on.
Green soup, yeah.
And Folsom Doom's little lieutenants are like, you, and they see him and he does the pose, and like the music kicks up, down, 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 down. And then they kick
huge set,
and they kick some ass. They really, really kick some ass up here.
The princess hates Valeria. Valeria's like, I'm trying to save you.
But it leads to the death of Valeria. James Earl Jones kills her with a snake arrow.
Kills her.
What do you think of Valeria's death?
Killed me, Mal. Kill me with an arrow. I think it's sad. I think they earn her. I like the line where she dies and she's like, let me breathe my last breath into you. I think that's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I do respect them for doing that just because I'm used to so many movies now and TV shows where you simply would not kill your female lead.
Mm-hmm. The Barbarians, like James Bond, he would have a new girl every movie.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
Valeria is his Vesper Lynn to bring it back to James Bond.
There you go. I think her death scene is really good. I think they're both quite good in it. And it's also, Conan within his own universe is kind of like Miles O'Brien. Like there's always loss. Even with victory, there's loss. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an appropriate choice.
I agree. It was pretty sad. And we get to this moment where they're going to do a Viking funeral. And Mako says, no fire will burn up there. And Conan goes up there and lights it and the fire kicks. And again, this is the second time in the movie that Conan takes over a former kingdom, the king by his own hand, as they say, because he took over the Atlantean kingdom, he took over this one, and he will take over Folsom Doom's by the end because Conan is the king.
Yeah.
So this is the point where most movies would end.
Yes.
Or you'd get one more scene, but we have two more scenes here. We have this giant battle where Subutai and Conan and Mako the Wizard holding off Folsom Doom and his two lieutenants. They set a bunch of traps. They do these things. All these traps are real things that you could really buy that were actually used in Mongolia and Vietnam and all these places in the past. They are real things. Mm-hmm. And it's how these two guys basically take on an army of like 25.
It's guerrilla warfare, and it's actually done in a much more believable way than, say, something like The Patriot.
Yes. And this also has one of the best speeches in the movie. I think it's actually Arnold's best speech in the entire movie.
Yeah.
Where he prays to Crom, his god, and he says, you'll not remember what we did. He's like, you'll just remember that two stood against many. And he's like, please grant me my revenge. And if not, to hell with you. That's basically what he says. And they get revenge. And Conan almost gets his butt kicked until Valeria shows up as a Valkyrie and blocks a move and basically saves Conan's life.
And Robert Eggers said, I'm going to do that.
Again, if you've seen The Northman, we won't tell you how. The Northman rips this moment off, and I did not realize this. But what do you think about Valeria as a Valkyrie returning?
Loved it. Honestly, it's like the coolest thing in the whole
love
movie.
how sparkly they make her and how she's like too bright.
Yeah, her costume too. I think the lighting probably helps how cheap the costume was.
Yeah.
But she looks great. It's so cool. I love the Valkyrie sequence.
And her, it also fits with the philosophy of the movie. Do you really want to live forever?
Yeah.
The musical motif during this is fantastic.
Yeah, they play that song, Who Wants to Live Forever?
Wrong movie.
Bringing it back to Jason's other favorite franchise.
I believe, by the way, Highlander has got to be getting close to its 40th anniversary. I think it's 86, maybe?
I don't want to watch that movie again.
Who wants to live forever?
If you would like to guest on that episode,
86.
You can tweet at us.
we'd have to keep this podcast going for another
4 years.
I can't do math right now, everybody.
4 years.
I'm a barbarian. Too many years.
4 years.
Too many years. Actually, let's talk about the final scene in the movie.
Okay.
So, Folsom Doom is a coward.
Yes.
He abandons the princess. He goes back to his temple. And Conan, before he goes back to Folsom Doom's temple, he gets his father's sword back from the very beginning of the movie. And his father's sword is broken.
Because it's not for him.
The steel cracks.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to the final temple. And we just have a very quick scene. Folsom Doom is there. He's praying. Conan shows up. And Folsom Doom stops. He says, "You'll be nothing without me."
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "What are you going to do without me?"
Mm-hmm.
And Conan's answer is to basically just chop his head off and throw it off the let it roll down the stairs.
It's a good speech, though, where he's like, I birthed you, like, I made you. Like, that's a great line. And it's something that I don't know if you would have this in a contemporary movie. I think it's something that's very much of the time, but James Earl Jones also doesn't deliver it screaming at the top of his lungs, which I think is really, really interesting.
Well, I wanted to ask you, because it's very interesting that this is not another battle. If this movie was made now, this would be another action set piece.
Yeah, against a sky
beam. But instead, they just decided to take it as like, Folsom Doom has been like, you can't kill me, or Folsom Doom has decided that he's like, I can talk this guy out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can talk this guy out of it, he'll become my new second. And Conan's answer is to just chop his head off.
Yeah.
And I love, again, the musical motif here, and I love that the followers throw their flowers into the water, very symbolic. And it's just like Conan sitting with his hand watching them all leave.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want to take over this.
It also shows you how fickle they are that they just leave.
Yeah, but they all
like how little actual influence he had.
It's such an interesting choice to do it that way, I think. And I kind of weirdly love it.
It shows you, too, that Conan is noble because he doesn't want the followers.
Oh, yes. A true barbarian would kill all the followers, too. Yeah. And then, of course, we get the true final scene, the epilogue of Conan in the future on the throne with gray hair, and he is the king. But you learn that he is a king by his own hand, but he is bored by this. Now, Ashley, what do you...
Clearly shot on a soundstage somewhere because there's nothing in the background and just a bunch of smoke.
Yes, of course. And in the next Conan movie, which is I highly recommend you don't watching, Conan the Destroyer, they just reuse the same shot.
Yeah.
I think actually in the second one, they begin with this shot, actually. They begin and end with it. Ashley, what do you think of a 1982 movie ending with an epilogue like this? Because they probably had no plan. I mean, besides Oliver Stone's crazy plans, they probably never thought that they would make a sequel to this movie.
Probably not. But I don't mind it. It's like an open-ended sort of thing. I think it's as close to an ending as you can get without killing Conan. So I think that's a pretty good option. I am very bored of the trope that a man is so great that simply being the most powerful person in the world drives him to distraction. Like, I hate that. I hated that in Game of Thrones. Like, I don't care for it.
What do you mean drives him to distraction?
It's like it's the idea that, and really rich privileged people like to say this too, that when your every need is met, when you're weighted on hand and foot, that
you're bored.
There's just, life isn't even worth living. I have everything I ever wanted. I don't have to work for anything. It's so hard. Like, I hate that trope.
That's fair.
I hate it. And they always do it with powerful men who are kings. And then they like disguise themselves and like run off to be a knight and get themselves murdered. Like, it's so boring. I don't like it.
I like it with a barbarian though, because the idea of like, if his whole life has been hacking and cutting, that sitting on a throne would be boring to him.
I don't believe that for one single second, because nobody actually wants to do anything or work. So I think if you, especially in that time, if you just got to yell at a bunch of people and have them do whatever you'd be like, this is the best day of my life. I will never work again ever. So I like, it's just it's a trope that I don't particularly care for, but I think for 1982,
sure, I
think it's interesting. And I think it shows that the creative team was hopeful for the future. But obviously it didn't work out for them. But I will say this.
They did get a sequel. So
only one.
Yeah, that's true.
And it was bad. But I will say this. Arnold is still alive. There's still time. And I think that would be a better use of the Conan brand than trying to do another reboot.
Man, I'll tell you what. I was so excited for the the Conan the Barbarian reboot with Jason Momoa. And I was so disappointed 5 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
You're not missing anything.
I know that a baby gets carved out of a lady's womb on the battlefield.
I actually recorded a bunch of interviews for that DVD. For the special features.
Fun fact.
So I got to see it early. And actually, that was the first time I actually met, I got to meet Leonard Maltin, famed film critic, because he was at that screening. And I was like, oh my God, there's Leonard Maltin. But literally within 5 minutes of that new movie, you kind of were like, oh, this is not going to, no.
I wonder if...
And I think Jason Momoa is good casting for that, by the way.
I wonder if we're past those types of movies now.
We might.
As made by a studio.
We might be.
And you're not going to get A24 making Conan the Barbarian.
But I would say that the Northman is kind of similar.
But again, made by not a major studio. Like, Conan is now a brand.
Yeah.
So like someone owns Conan. Conan is not going to A24 or Monkey Paw or something like that for production.
By the way, listeners, I want to apologize. Apparently our neighbors have decided to activate their leaf blower for no reason right now. So you might hear some weird stuff in there. And if I was Conan the Barbarian, I would in them crom. Anyways, Ashley, let's get to this. I want to end the podcast with you now, Ashley.
Yes.
Stand before Crom.
Okay.
And you must answer. What is the Riddle of Steel, Ashley?
Oh, I thought I was going to have to answer like who was the best performance.
No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But you are in front of Crom, and I will again read to you what his father says. What the question is.
Sure.
The secret of steel has always carried with it a mystery. You must learn its riddle, Conan. You must learn its discipline. For no one in this world you can trust. Not men, not women, not beasts. He points to the steel and says, this you can trust. You are in front of Crom. Ashley, what is the Riddle of Steel?
It's the steel inside you. It's your own metal.
I'm going to give it to you. That's pretty close. Yeah, the movie tells you what it is.
Yeah, I know. But that's what my answer would have been.
I think it is steel will grow brittle. Flesh will age, will and conviction will prevail.
Yeah, it's your own metal.
It is the will and the belief that motivates the sword, and to use the sword rightly and not against the weak. It's very much in when Conan says that two stood against many, and one. So that is what it is. All right, let's talk a little bit about the legacy of this movie before we get to best actor, best scene, and whatnot.
The Northman.
Yes. So this is the movie that made Schwarzenegger's career.
Yep.
It is this movie. Without it, we would not know Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Can I give you a controversial thought about that?
Oh, sure. What's the controversial thought?
Arnold Schwarzenegger peaks at Conan.
I don't think so, but sure.
And I don't mean to
at
say
the start.
I don't mean to say that he's never ever good again, but I don't think he's ever as good and as effective as a performer as he is here, not even in the Terminators.
I would disagree. I would
That's
disagree
fine.
with that.
That's why I said it's my opinion.
I disagree that he peaks at Conan the Barbarian.
It's my favorite thing he's ever done.
Sure.
So
it is definitely my favorite thing that he's ever done.
It's why I think it's one of the only reasons why if they were going to make more Conan, I'd be like, it's got to be him.
Mm-hmm. Well,
stop dyeing your hair, Arnold. We know.
Conan is. Well, we can talk about this legacy together.
Sure.
Without a doubt, would you agree with this statement? Conan the Barbarian is the gold standard for the sword and sorcery genre.
Yeah, certainly.
Like, you cannot make a sword and sorcery film without watching this movie.
Yeah, I mean, people would probably bring up other examples. I think Lord of the Rings would be the most obvious one, but there's such a direct line between these two things. Conan the Barbarian is also, I think, the epitome of 80s sword and sorcery, which is very special. It's the best version of this.
So, this movie, because it was so popular, it spawned a republishing of the Conan books. It spawned more Conan comics. It spawned an animatronic show at Universal Studios, and it spawned a wave of low-budget sword and sorcery knockoffs, including Krull, Gore, and the previously mentioned Beastmaster, which some film critics have called that the sword and sorcery, and I quote, subgenre of the 1980s were a blight on movie screens. Because there were so many of them.
Yes, I believe there's also one that's called Sword and Sorcery, quite simply.
So Conan, again, it took in $10 million in its opening weekend, which was pretty big at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. There is a direct line between this movie and Lord of the Rings. You do not get Lord of the Rings. You do not get Northman without this movie. I don't think you get the 13th Warrior without this movie.
No.
There's a reason why I think people still talk about this movie. I mean, again, if I were to ever teach a film class, I would make my students watch this film.
Yes. I think because Arnold is the lead, I think sometimes people think it's not good.
I agree.
Because we don't look to Arnold for great acting performances. He's a great presence.
Yes.
But I actually think that he's a big part of why the movie works.
All right, let's get to some of these ratings here. Ashley, who is the best actor in this movie?
Mako.
Okay.
Hands down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's either Mako or James Earl Jones. I would say I enjoy Mako's performance more as the wizard, as Uncle Iroh before the tea set in. But it's between the two of them, certainly. It's actually probably James Earl Jones.
Interesting. I think it's Arnold. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger without a doubt.
Okay.
Because I don't think you can carry a movie without barely talking and not be a good actor.
Okay.
That's what this movie lives or dies on Arnold. And this movie lives very much on his silent performance.
That's true. I will give it to him for this movie.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
sure.
If you're going towards, yes, I mean, just with the one scene, it's probably James Earl Jones.
Yeah. Because he takes some very silly speeches and makes them like threatening and interesting. Yeah.
I am very curious to hear your thought about this. We know what my best scene is. It's the Atlantean Sword. All silent.
Yeah, Tower of Snakes.
You like the Tower set?
Absolutely. I love
the whole sequence of him killing the snakes.
I love it. It's great. I love it from Valeria's introduction through her jumping off into the pool. It's great.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know why. I really enjoy it. Maybe because it's the first time it's the team. It's like the fellowship kind of going out for the first time. But I really like that sequence. And then like the weird cult is just like the icing on the cake for me.
And based on a scale of 1 to 5 Bregos, Brego the intern cat, what would you rate? Hold on a second. Brego the intern cat is in here. Brego.
He is fully asleep.
What do you think about Conan the Barbarian?
Didn't even open his eyes.
6 stars. Wow, that's amazing.
6 stars.
That's great. That's awesome. Great job, Brego. What would you give? 6 Bregos. 6 of himself.
Oh, you made him stretch. I think this movie really holds up. I think
surprisingly well.
I think for how dated it is, you have to do a pretty limited amount of mental gymnastics in order to enjoy it. The thing that is gonna keep me from giving it 5 stars is the sheer amount of rape in this movie.
It's one scene.
It's a protracted scene.
It's one scene, and it doesn't even start on camera.
That's true.
So,
and I suppose
it is even implied.
I suppose it's debatable whether or not it is rape because they say he was bred with, which it was like I don't know. Like, did the women pay to be? You know, I don't know.
I would honestly say it's rape.
It's bad though. It's pretty bad.
Rape.
Yeah. And there are some pretty weak performances.
There are.
But I do think that the movie's very rewatchable. I think it's a good time. And I think it's really important. And this is a genre that I really like. So I think if I didn't give it the credit it's due, that would be disrespectful. So I'm going to give it 4 Bregos. 4 full-sized, complete, intern GHL Cap Brego.
Interesting.
Is that higher or lower than you thought I would give it?
What was your rating again? I'm sorry?
4?
4. That's definitely higher.
Okay, what are you going to give it? Conan.
It's a 5 out of 5, without a doubt. It is one of the most infinitely... Ashley asked me before we rewatched it for this podcast. She said, how many times do you think you've seen this movie? Mm-hmm. And I can't honestly tell you. I would guess it has probably been 30 times at this point. Mm-hmm. Because I know there were some times when I was making some films in college where I was rewatching this to get the tone and to be like, oh, think like John Milius, do this. Mm-hmm. And I have never gotten tired of this movie. Every time I watch this movie, I'm like, yeah.
It is a murderer's row of talent involved with this, like all the way from producers on. And like sometimes it's hard to be like, what does a producer actually do? Mm-hmm. But Dino,
find the right people and put them together.
Well, but Dino De Laurentiis, like you said this, you taught me this. They are tastemakers or thought leaders, to borrow the Righteous Gemstones phrase. Dino De Laurentiis, if you look at his body of work,
he found John Milius to make this movie.
He touched so many important, iconic movies, a lot of which were underrated at the time, but are beloved now. John Milius, same thing. Like Mako, like a legendary James Earl Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like there's Basketball Doors. Like a lot of people who worked on this movie are incredible artists or incredible at what they did. And you can look at this movie and be like, but it's just like a barbarian, like it's a hack and slash. Silly. Yes,
it's a hack and slash.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Like I agree. The cinematography is beautiful. The editing is masterful. The direction is amazing. Editing is
very good. Yeah.
The music is astounding.
Yeah. The composition.
It is just like, yes, it has a lot of goofy parts, but I would also argue, I would say, show me any movie from the 80s and the 70s that doesn't have a goofy scene in it.
Particularly a genre movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I would watch this over probably a third of the Marvel movies. Like if to be completely horrible about it.
Well, I mean, if you want to be flat out honest, I think we'll be talking about Conan the Barbarian much longer than many of the Marvel movies.
Yeah,
in 20 years
and DC movies as well.
Yeah,
but yeah. This is a film, and
this is a film. That is correct.
And there's a weird
line.
Even
with all the goofy parts,
absolutely,
it is a film.
There's a weird arbitrary line of what is art and what is a film versus
this is a piece of art.
This is a film. Absolutely.
This is a piece of art.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Our recommended reading this week, we'll have a bunch of Conan stuff.
So comics, Blu-rays. We'll put the soundtrack on there. Sure. All kinds of good stuff.
Go find that at geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading. Ashley, let's get into that honor roll. What is the honor roll?
The honor roll is where if you go over to Apple Podcasts or whatever the heck it is that iTunes calling itself nowadays, and you leave us a 5-star review, we'll read whatever you write. So if you're going to drag us, at least give us 5 stars. And if you are an international person, we can't see your Apple Podcast. So take a cute little screenshot and send that to geekhistorylesson@gmail.com. And please tell us where you're from, because we can't always suss that out
Especially if you're from Perth, Australia.
Yeah, we want to stay in your guest house. So we have 2 people joining the honor roll today. The first is Harvey Manbird.
What was that name again?
Harvey_Manbird.
All right. Okay.
Who says, entertaining yet informative. Came across the Batman timeline on YouTube, which led me to the podcast itself. I'm picking and choosing certain episodes, but I really enjoyed each one so far. I appreciate all the research that goes into each episode. I also like learning about characters that I'd otherwise not read on my own. For instance, Shazam. Never read any Shazam books before, but just ordered a few based on your recommended reading. Keep up the good work. Harvey Manbird, tell me on Twitter. I want to know what ones you read and what you thought of them.
Yeah.
And he is, I'm assuming your pronouns. They are also joined by Great Duran, who says, awesome show that makes me smile. Jason and Ashley, thank you for the content. Always a breath of fresh air with the lessons. You guys are great. You're great.
You're great for that review. Thank you.
So Great Duran and Harvey_Manbird, welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. Professor Jason, what is going on there today?
Sword making.
Who's teaching it?
Conan.
Great.
That's all. Based on this lesson and the film we just talked about, that's all you get.
Great.
Thanks for writing those reviews on the honor roll. Guys, everybody, by the way, this week, patreon.com/Jawiin, Jawiin. There's Marvel Club, also GHL Extra. We're going to talk a little bit about King Conan, the unproduced Conan the Barbarian sequel that John Milius tried to get off the ground before he died and is still sort of in production.
Yeah, Jason read the script, so we got some fun stuff to talk about.
I did read the script and I found some stuff, so go check that out. Come over and listen to that episode, GHL Extra, every single week. You can follow Ashley on Twitter and Instagram. Where, Ashley?
At Ashley V. Robinson. I'm also on TikTok because I'm very young.
And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Jawiin. That's Jawiin. And where can they find us, the podcast on socials?
You can find us at geekhistorylesson.com. We have a blog there. We just read about Doctor Strange. You're going to love it. We have facebook.com/geekhistorylesson. We're on Twitter at GHL Podcast because they have the most restricted letter numbers, and on Instagram at Geek History Lesson.
All right, we're to hashtag stick around, the last part of the podcast where we made sure you stayed through the whole episode. Ashley, favorite costume in 1982?
Conan's mom's.
Conan the Barbarian.
Easy. Conan's mom's costume.
Second favorite costume?
James Earl Jones's, the first time he's on top of the big pyramid with his cult. Because it's kind of like a black with like it's like literally like glittery blue highlights. It's so great.
All right, cool. Is there a part of Conan the Barbarian that you like better than others? The movie? Like, is there a set
Tower
piece?
of Set.
Let's stop talking about the snakes. Beyond that.
The snake puppets are so cool.
You like snake puppets. All right. Put snake puppets in it. Ashley Victoria Robinson is there.
Actually, absolutely. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
We have a trio of heroes.
We have a trio of heroes?
Yeah.
Yes.
F, marry, kill.
Oh, this is where we're going with this? Conan, Subutai,
And
or Valeria. Oh, man. Interesting.
It's a hard question, huh?
It is a hard question.
Because it's really, who do you want to kill?
I think I'm killing Conan. I think I'm killing Conan. I'm going to F Subutai.
So that you can marry Valeria.
Marry Valeria.
I knew you would marry Valeria.
She's a babe.
She is a babe. She is a true
Who
babe.
are you going with?
With beautiful Farrah Fawcett. I killed Conan because I don't want to get anywhere near that pelvis. He would crush me.
Then are you marrying Subutai?
I would probably marry Subutai. Also, he can surf.
That's fair.
So that's fun.
He's a very chill dude.
And then I would F Valeria simply for the story.
This is interesting that we chose basically the same two. It's just a preference on which one we want to keep around longer.
Yeah.
I like it.
So if we join the trio, we just have to kill Conan and we'll all be booed up. It'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Geek History Lesson. I am Jason, the Sword of Atlantis Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the class?
What is best in life? Ending this podcast?